Imagine if we were more civil at work, not more polite. Politeness is BS. Civil, from the Latin civitas, meaning citizen, a well-functioning member of society. Societies work when we have hard conversations, when we bring a shared respect for our common humanity, when we're willing to offend and be offended. This is not where we are right now, as a society or at work. We avoid the hard conversations. We substitute through our teeth agreement for respect. We turn offense into passive aggression. Layer that in with a culture that rewards a near constant state of navel gazing, and the results aren't pretty. Lexi Hudson knows we can do better, and she wrote a book, The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves, that tells us how. It's not about following a rigid set of rules. It's about leaning into time-tested wisdom that has been at the center of great societal advances, from ancient Greece to the modern civil rights movement. Lexi's translation for today's world? Be less like Larry David, angling for every scrap of ego fuel we can find, no matter the cost to others. Be more like her grandmother, Margaret, a magnanimous soul, self-composed, generous, other-oriented, and real. Welcome to the DesuckifyWork podcast, the show where we cut through the BS and find ways to make work more fun, more human, and less ridiculous. All of which makes your business more profitable, by the way. Today's episode is a part of the ProHuman Series, in partnership with the ProHuman Foundation, where Lexi is an advisor. If you enjoyed this one, please like, share, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast. Let the desuckifying begin. Here's Lexi. Okay, Lexi Hudson, welcome to the DesuckifyWork podcast.
Thanks, TJ. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Before we dig into too much of what you're doing, I'd love to give you a chance to just tell us a bit about what you do for work and how you came to be doing it.
I am a creator. I'm a writer, storyteller. I'm a mother. I like this. We all often talk about work, the nature of work, the future of work. I like this word vocation. It comes from the Latin word vocare, which means to call. And I think that's helpful because it's like, what is your calling in life? Today, when we think about the vocational trades, we think of trades, right? Like you're a plumber, that's a vocational.
Yeah.
But actually, we all have a vocation. And my calling, my vocation, I'm passionate about the way that ideas and storytelling change people's lives and can help us live life deeper and richly and better. And that's really the unifying themes of my work. I love learning and telling great stories. I love learning out loud and sharing that with people. So my book came out a few years ago. It's called The Soul of Civility, Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves. And I had a TV series come out with the great courses called Storytelling and the Human Condition. And most importantly, I'm a mother. My calling is to create good human beings. I have 3 children. Sophia Marco is 3, Percival James is 5, Sebastian John is 11 months now and just about to take his first step. So lots of exciting things happening in our little world. And I love the creative work that I do, but nothing is as important as my vocation, my calling, my work as a mother. And I know that's the most important thing I'll do to make the world a better place is do my part to be a good example for my children and raise them into being good humans. And that's, they're also the motivation for my vocation, for my creative work, for my calling, which is to make the world a more gentle place for them to grow up.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm curious within that context, how does work sort of sit into your life, given that your kids are such a big part of it? What role is it playing for you?
Very imperfectly. How does it sit? Very imperfectly.
Yeah.
I'd say that's the core tension of my existence. How do I be the kind of mother I want to be while doing the work in the world that I feel called to do? I literally can't not do it. And, people ask me, oh, how did you get a book done with 3 kids? I say, I don't know. It just happened. Like, it couldn't not happen. And it's been hard. Like, I think the bulk of it is when I wrote the book, I only had 1 child. And then the other children came along as I was like promoting the book on book tour. So I've been in
Mm.
105
Wow.
countries with two, now three small children. And I wouldn't have it any other way. If I go to these places without my children, I'm not the mother I want to be. I would never have children. And yes, bringing them with me is hard, but it's the only option. And we have so much fun. Kids are resilient much more than we give them credit for.
That's a really interesting thought. I want to come back to that at some point because, this is the DesuckifyWork podcast. And I often think about, a lot of my focus is on leaders and how they're helping workplaces, but I often think about people coming into the workplace and are they prepared? So I want to come back to that note of, helping kids be more resilient so that they're prepared for all the things that life throws at them, whether that's work, building a family, etc. I do want to touch first on this idea of civility. It's an interesting word because in some ways, and this is maybe sad, but it almost sounds like a quaint word. The idea of being civil sounds old-fashioned almost to my ear. I'm like, we don't say this word that often. And
Right.
I'm curious if you notice that, you're in it and what brought you to that word and what do you mean by it?
Civility is, you're right, a deeply misunderstood word, but good news, it's making a comeback. So
Nice.
it's the art of human flourishing. It is the bare minimum of respect that we are owed and owe to others by virtue of our shared dignity and personhood. Civility, crucially, is more than mere politeness. This is a core argument I make in my book called The Soul of Civility, that people often use these words interchangeably, whether they want more civility and politeness or whether they want less. What some people today argue that civility and politeness are tools of the patriarchy, tools of the oppressor, tools of the supremacist to silence,
Yeah.
to oppress. And, both these groups, whether they want more civility and politeness less, they fail to make this distinction that they're different concepts. So I argue that politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's external stuff, where civility is something deeper. It's a disposition of the heart. It's an orientation. It's a fundamental Weltanschauung, as the Germans would say. It's a worldview, a way of seeing others as human beings, just like us, worthy of a bare minimum of respect, just by virtue of being human. And that sometimes being civil, actually loving and respecting someone, means offending them, risking hurting their feelings, even telling them a hard truth.
Yeah.
But doing so out of that spirit of love and respect. So I love etymology, such as the etymology of the Latin word vocare, or vocation.
Mm-hmm.
But the etymology of civility and politeness is very illuminating as well. The etymology of politeness is polere, which means to smooth or polish, and that's what politeness does. It papers over difference, sweeps it under the rug, as opposed to giving us the tools to grapple with difference head on, which is what civility does. The Latin word of civility is civitas, which is citizen, the root of our word citizen, civilization, even. And that's what civility is. It's the mores, that the disposition, the habits befitting a citizen in the city, which especially in a democracy requires truth-telling. It requires debate. You can't sweep difference under the rug. You can't, polish over disagreement in a democracy and pretend it's not there. So that is all to answer your question of what I mean by civility and what I don't. I don't mean politeness. I don't mean this tone policing, bring over difference. I mean civility, actually respecting each other to have honest conversations.
Well, it's interesting as you described it, and this idea of recognizing underneath it a little bit of our shared humanity. And, I connected with you through the ProHuman Foundation. It feels like a very pro-human thing to encourage civility. And the distinction I also hear between the words is politeness sort of shuts us down in many ways. And while civility seems like an invitation to speak, an invitation to contribute to the conversation, where politeness sort of almost dissuades us from from speaking out of a desire not to hurt someone's feelings. So one is a closed feeling almost, and the other is very much an open feeling. Does that sit right to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think civility has an obligation to others, like we owe them a
Yeah.
bare minimum of respect, but it's also an obligation we have to ourselves. We respect ourselves enough to have boundaries with people, to tell someone no. I think that there's this there are these polarities in life right now where on one hand, there's so much viciousness and rancor. We're just kind of tired of it. Like it's
Yeah.
ubiquitous. And so we kind of maybe in our personal lives try to be a counterbalance to that. And we're maybe too conciliatory. We just don't want any conflict. We're exhausted. So we'll just let things go. And so it's because we're just, the conflict is all out there all day. And so, but civility is a good counterbalance to that tendency to say no, respect yourself enough to stand up for yourself, to say no, to risk, declining an invitation, to risk, hurting someone's feelings because you
Hmm.
yourself and love yourself, appreciate yourself, respect yourself enough have to have that boundary. I think we fear offending people. We fear hurting their feelings, and that's
Yeah.
not a bad thing, but it can be if it's at the expense of our self-worth or an expression of a lack of our own self-worth. And my book, I wrote it to be an antidote to these deeply dehumanizing times. Yes, we met through the ProHuman Foundation, and why I love being on the board of advisors with them is because they believe that every single person, regardless of what they look like and who they are, what they believe, we fundamentally have more in common as human beings than not. Live in these dehumanizing times where we want to strip away the humanity and the personhood of people
Yeah.
that we disagree with. And my book, I wrote it to be a humanistic manifesto extolling the gift of being human in ourselves and in others as an antidote to these dehumanizing times that we live in.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of dehumanizing times is interesting. I feel like certainly the online world feels that way. It flattens everybody and it incentivizes us to act in not human ways. And I think about the experience in real life. And you mentioned sometimes we tamper things down a little bit because we're exhausted. But I also feel sometimes in quote unquote real life, things actually seem okay, meaning like when I'm just hanging out with people, it's okay. It's just something about when you get beyond the small group and into those larger social networks, whether that's online or whether that's a large group of people in real life, that we're struggling a bit. Do you see a distinction between kind of the dynamics of, hey, I'm hanging out with my friends and we can kind of talk crap with each other and it's fine, versus what you see online or what you maybe see on a grander scale? Is there a distinction there, or am I missing something?
You mean in terms of the code of conduct, the standards we should hold ourselves to in more comfortable settings? Yeah, I mean, Friedrich Hayek, the economist, has this offers a reflection on this. He says we must operate within two worlds simultaneously, and they're fluid worlds. One world, and they're worlds with different logics,
Mm-hmm.
different expectations. So one world is the sphere of the countless interactions we have each day, both in person and online, with total strangers. Where that's one logic. We owe them a bare baseline of decency, but we don't necessarily owe them an invitation into our home and we don't owe them like best friendship. And then there's another logic, another world, our friends and our family and our intimates, and we owe them something different. It's a different logic, different norms, different codes of interaction. And we do owe them more, significantly more. And the difficulty in this very informal world that we live in now, this very hyper-connected world, those lines are increasingly blurred where people we've never met before are now, Facebook only has one category, right? Everyone's a friend, whether you've
Yeah.
never met them or whether they're literally your spouse or your best friend, right? Like it's all
Yeah.
kind of mush. And so this is the interesting thing about norms especially norms in this era where things are changing so quickly. And this is also why my book is not a set of rules. If I had, written a book about the do's and don'ts of the modern era, they would have been outdated the
Yeah.
moment they were published because the
Hmm.
world is changing so quickly that we're constantly having to reinvent anew and like kind of invent for ourselves. What does the situation require? And it's hard, it's exhausting. And so I, for my book, a set of tools, a framework to think, okay, what does civility look like? What does respect for the other look like? What is the pro-human way of being in this moment? And what does the situation require? And let that question guide the proper behavior as opposed to having it be prescriptive. Like in this
Yeah.
situation, at all times, do this one thing. Like, no, human life is far too complex and nuanced for those sorts of prescriptions. Even like if you look at, I love looking at texts, ethical, you know, maxims, religious manuals, these conduct books from other times and other
Mm.
places that were in a similar genre. And I survey them throughout my book because this is like the same wisdom tradition, the tradition of the life well lived that I draw from my own. Like looking at the book of Proverbs, for example, in the Hebrew Bible, it you know, one page to the next will have totally contradictory proverbs. Like, for example, there's an undercurrent in the book of Proverbs that says good input yields good output. Hard work, honesty, integrity leads to good results, happy life, wealth, wellness, tranquility, of soul and spirit and life. And that is a drumbeat. You see that time and time again throughout Proverbs. Good input, good output. But then there's also Proverbs like this one says, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory lies with the Lord.
Mm.
Basically, you can do all the right things, as it relates to work, for example. You can study hard. You can get good grades. You can get into a good college. You can get the good internship. You can get a good job.
Yeah.
And, we just had some friends over. My husband went to Yale Law School, very fancy school. And we had some other friends over, also went to Yale, and like they were just reminiscing about these are people, their generation. They graduated 10 years ago, not to date old, my husband and I are, but that they're all kind of almost mid-career at this point. And like everyone in their generation class, their kind of class range is kind of hitting a ceiling
Mm.
where they've gotten all the gold stars, all the scholarships, all the good grades, all
Yeah.
the best schools their entire life and done all the right things. And yet, for whatever reason, they're, being pushed out. They're not being made partner. They're not getting the right, gold stars anymore. And it's just for no fault of their own.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
just sometimes input doesn't yield output. And what do you do? And so, anyway, all that to say, that was just a tangent that relates to work and the realities of modern work where things are changing so quickly. It's like we don't know what the needs of tomorrow are going to offer. And what do we do?
Yeah.
Thoughts of what we do, what we should do. But anyway, why I didn't write a set of maxims and rules because and this is why Proverbs has literally totally polar opposite maxims on the same page sometimes because different things require different circumstances require different conduct. And the right thing is not always the right thing at all times in all places. This is
Yeah.
the fundamental question of philosophy, in fact. What is a universal truth? What is a specific truth, a truth in a particular moment, a particular time, and particular place? And how do we disambiguate that and act accordingly?
Yeah. I mean, you're you're speaking to just the complexity of life in many ways, right? And the nuance of life. I think there is this modern desire for there to be, I do it this way all the time. And that's kind of the appeal of the polarities in politics is everything is either on the left or on the right. And it makes it easy for me as opposed to trying to investigate each situation and think about it more holistically and situationally, which is a lot harder than how do I live in that. So I appreciate that you're not giving a set of rules, but you're giving sort of a foundational platform from which you can live within that. And you mentioned work, and I want to come into that a little bit because work is this really interesting social space, right? It's a place where You mentioned strangers and friends, and sometimes work is a little bit of a mix of both, right? We might know some of the people and be kind of friendly with them. Others are basically strangers. And we all have to come together and do a thing or do things. And one of the things I notice within work also is that we're working together as teams, but there is a individualized reward system, meaning we get performance reviews and we get promoted based on my individual work. And I wonder how the idea of civility might step into this tension between the individual and the team and all of that in a work setting.
Yeah, I mean, I just read an article about this last night that we hear about incivility in the halls of Congress, at international meetings, from our public leaders all the time. That's what tends to dominate the headlines. But we tend to maybe roll our eyes at that and throw our hands up at that. But what really gets our goat is like civility in the everyday, in the small places. The workplace bully, the person who literally shuts you down at every meeting, or the clerk at the grocery store with attitude for no reason. In I had an editor reach out to me about this recently. Air Canada recently went on strike. The flight attendants all went on strike. And a core thing, and the strike's now over recently, but the core thing that the strike was about, apparently, was that they were compensated only for time in the air, but not compensated for boarding and deplaning, which is the most grating part from a flight attendant's perspective, where they're trying to like sheep, herd sheep, herd cats. That's what it should be. Herd cats. And people are annoying. They don't want to be manhandled. They don't want to be micromanaged.
Mm-hmm.
It's just and people, I think we're all kind of running on empty emotionally. We're all kind of at our wits' end all the time. And
Yeah.
off travel, it just puts us in close proximity. It's already stressful, and then puts us in the close proximity with everyone else at our worst. We're
Mm-hmm.
tired, stressed. We're utilitarian, get from point A to point B. And then a flight attendant being like, "Oh, sir, we're gonna have to check your bag." You're like, "No, that's the last thing I needed," right? Anyway, flight attendants were like, "You're not paying us enough. You're not paying us at all to deal with, annoying, crazy, rude people and deplaning." And so, anyway, this is where it's coming up most. And I was just reflecting on this in an article that I call it the Larry David effect. So Larry David, the creator of Seinfeld, he's television's favorite curmudgeon. I love the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he's just like this broken and selfish person. And he's hysterical. And in my book, I call him the foremost defender of civilization, but that's another gloss, another commentary for Larry David later. But anyway, he is undeniably selfish and sees the world purely through his very specific definition of social justice, and then walks around bumping into others, causing more brokenness and hurt and heartache when people don't see the world exactly as he does. He's everyone's inner ego and inner id, where there's like no separation between a thought and what he says and what he wants to do and what he does. He just is like purely out there, exactly what he wants to do all the time. The whole show is about the awkwardness and suffering, about like what would happen if we all did that. And we laugh at it, but we also cringe at it as well, because it's like he does what we want to do, but we would never do. It's like they get very much the inner ego and the inner id. And so we often walk around like that in life, just broken, selfish people bumping into others and making others' days worse and lives worse. And I contrast that with someone really important to me, my late grandmother, Margaret. And she was someone, I call her I call this concept, there's a Larry David effect on one hand, and then there's my grandmother on the other. I call it the mellifluous echo of the magnanimous soul.
Hmm.
This idea of the magnanimous soul, we get it from Aristotle, and the magnanimous soul was the great-souled person, who was so self-composed, they were completely self-forgetful, like kind of the very opposite of Larry David. Larry David goes into a situation and says, "I'm gonna make the situation exactly how I want it to be, and I want everyone to do exactly what I want. I don't care what it costs me. I don't care what it costs anyone else." He's willing to win an argument but lose a friend,
Yeah.
get a table but clear the room, eating
Mhm.
totally, you know. But my grandmother, she was so self-composed. She was able to enter society utterly self-forgetful, and she instead was completely other-oriented in how she operated in the world at large. Like she would go to the grocery store and she would buy a big bouquet of flowers, bring them home, separate the big bouquet into 10 or 12 smaller bouquets, tie them with a little ribbon, and then just go knocking on neighbors' doors saying, "Hey, I was thinking of you." She would just call you for no reason and say, "I read this and you were on my mind, and I think you'd like this." She loved to porch front. It was both a physical space and also a metaphor. She had her front patio or front terrace where she would just sit and wave to neighbors and strangers alike and just pass the time actively looking for opportunities to brighten someone's day.
Mm.
But she didn't just do that from her front patio, from her front porch. She did that wherever she went. She was eager to make people feel seen and known and loved. And she elevated life's everyday junctures wherever she went. Eternity, like we will never know this side of eternity the good that she accomplished, like and bringing light and life into people's lives, just as we'll never be able to fully quantify the hurt and brokenness that
Yeah.
Larry David and others like him bring into the world when they just do one annoying thing. We don't know when that's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back to make someone, go berserk, right? I think that's really telling about why airline travel is so hard and why air flight attendants get the worst of it. Because it's like and it's just the last thing anyone wants is to be harassed. I mean, I get that too. I've been on hundreds of flights the last few years on book
Yeah.
tour. And it's like, oh, getting manhandled and yelled at and treated like chattel. It's the worst. It really is. But it's hard to maintain that recognition that it's just another person doing their job.
Hmm. Yeah.
Don't shoot the messenger. It's really hard. So anyway, all that to say, you asked about how this manifests in the workplace, and it's the small places that matter most.
Yeah.
We're so interconnected. This conversation of civility isn't the purview of, elevated halls of power of Congress or
Hmm.
Parliament. This is a conversation for the everyday, the small places. That's where it matters most. And it starts with us remembering the personhood and dignity of the other in the everyday, in the small places where it matters most.
Mm. How can we be more like your grandmother at work and less like Larry David?
I know, it is a lifelong commitment. This is a lifestyle. Our theme I talk about in my book that civility is not a new problem. It's not an America problem,
Hmm.
not a democracy problem, not a Donald Trump problem. This is a timeless human problem. And it's always been around. It's because of the human condition. We're profoundly social. We want to be in relationship, and yet we're so fallen at the
Yeah.
same time and broken and, hurt people, whole people, heal people. So how do we be more like my grandma? How do we heal? I mean, the subtitle of my book says a lot. It's The Soul of Civility, and the subtitle is Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves.
Hmm.
And doing the hard work of sitting alone in a room. This is what Blaise Pascal, my favorite French philosopher, scientist, polymath, said. He said, all of man's misery stems from his inability to sit alone quietly in a room. And like we're so distracted, the moment we sit alone, we, we're with ourselves, we're with our problems. But sitting alone in our room, like being still, resting, getting our own issues, getting ourselves out of the way. This is a theme that you see in many world religions, from Christianity, from Buddhism to even Islam, that the human ego
Yeah.
is the root of all suffering. And like getting out of our own way to bring forth that which is best and noble in us and giving that to others. That is the key to happiness and the good life. And that is a hard thing to do. It's like it's working against our nature, but to do that, Iris Murdoch, the Irish philosopher, she said that that is our everyday task, moment by moment task, to conquer what she called the fat, relentless ego. Like it's hard. It's hard. Like every moment, day by day, are we saying, you know, I'm choosing society. I'm choosing this thing called life with others.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pretend that I live on an island and can just do. what I want to do whenever I want. But that's how Larry David lives, and that's why it's
Yeah.
historical, but also so telling as
Yeah.
well.
And you feel that Larry Davidness in lots of places. And I definitely see it at workplace. And what I would say, I'm curious, and I know we'll try to wrap things up here. But the idea of, sitting alone and all that stuff, I love that. And I even, thought about doing, I don't know if you've heard of the hard 75 thing, which is about people working out like really intensely for 75 days. I was like, I wonder if I could sit quietly for 45 minutes a day for 75 days. Like
Wow, I
actually
love
sounds
it.
that sounds harder to me than working out twice a day and all the stuff that the other thing does, but I'm intrigued by it. And but I'm curious, like, okay, we can all try to step into that mindset a bit more. Is there also room for in workplaces and other civic gathering places, some group work, some effort by the group to invite more of that as well?
I mean, it's funny. You're setting me up to promote the reading guide I just created for my book. Yeah, I just
Nice.
launched it on Monday. It's the reading and discussion guide. It's a resource that I created for personal reflection, but also for book clubs, for just a person who wants to, read this book with two other friends. It's just
Mm,
by chapter discussions and exercises, things for further reflection to help, because I think that is absolutely my ideal, that this thing's called civility. It starts at the personal level, but it's also the stuff of the good life. We're not meant to be alone. We're meant to be in community and in relationship with others. And that is hard. That
yeah.
is, it's not a foregone conclusion. It's fragile. And so my dream is for this to be, go-to book club read for that exact reason.
Yeah, I love that you're creating that because I think we need some help in framing these conversations. And even the concept of the good life to me is interesting because what's painted as the good life sort of on social media, blah, 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 I don't think is at all what you're talking about. And so just getting comfortable with reframing what the good life
Yes.
means and that it means being with each other well and connecting with each other in ways that allow us to further society and civilization in a good way and not simply to get more, or to make ourselves look better at the expense of others, which is what you see a lot of times online.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I've asked you a handful of questions here. If you turn that around and had a question for the audience relating to this idea of civility.
Yeah, I'd love to know, I have so many questions, but one is after work went virtual, like what are some things in the workplace that are causing consternation and frustration? This is one of my theories that human life together is like a muscle. And when we're not together, it atrophies. And I think it did atrophy in really important and powerful ways. While we were, you and I right now, TJ, are virtual. We're not in person. Like that's
Yeah.
just not the same. It's not a
Mhm.
perfect replacement. We learned that during the painful pandemic. So what are the things that are, in what ways has that? And I think it's just that other orientedness, that the small things that we had to think about when we were with others, we didn't have to in person in the
Mhm.
audience. We didn't have to think about those when I could be on Zoom with you and in my pajamas,
Right.
if I'm wearing pants at all, right?
Right. Yeah.
In Zoom culture.
Yeah.
So, and I'm reading about SHRM, the Human Resources Organization, is writing all these studies about how incivility has never been higher in the workplace. Something like 33, 37% of people are both experiencing and witnessing harassment and incivility in the workplace. And I don't even think that includes the microaggression of someone leaving their, food bowl in the sink. The collective
Mhm.
sink stinks
Yeah.
up the sink and it's gross. It's not
Yeah.
aesthetically pleasing, but it is those things as
Yeah.
well. I'm not sure how often people are. So I would be curious, like, what are the kinds of incivility that people are experiencing in the workplace right now? And that it matters to you. There's some things we can easily like turn a blind eye and let go. But what is bothering you right now? The related question is to what extent has that to do with with being off online and not in person for several years? I mean, some of us still haven't gone back
Yeah.
to since then. There's no question that it it did change the face of work. So I'd be curious to hear that.
Yeah.
Write to me with your ideas to your
Yeah.
listeners. I'd love to hear
I
from you.
invite people to do that. And just a quick note on that too. I think there's a group of folks who are experiencing that at a higher level, which is younger folks who sort of went through college remotely and then got into the workplace and it's maybe still remote. And they really didn't have that initial like flash exposure of I'm now in a very unique environment in a workplace and I need to learn how to be civil in it. And I'm curious what schools are doing, what young people are trying to do to figure out like, how do I exist in this world that like I never even sniffed, let
Yeah.
alone had a chance to learn about, you know? So this is the Desuckify Work podcast. So I'm curious if you could wave a magic wand and create a more fully desuckified world of work, a more pro-human world of work. What does that look like?
Ooh, well, for a state legislature that has begun reading my book as a bipartisan book club, I created a resource called The Soul of Civility in one lesson. It has three core points on it, and maybe I'll share that with you and your community as a resource. But it has three core points from my book. It's like the whole book is distilled. But what the legislator said to me, they're like, I want to read this book, but nobody actually reads. And so can you please give me the book in one page? And I said, okay, I can do that for
There.
you. Anyway, I'll give you just two since we're pressed for time. But the first one is that civility is not politeness. Okay, so like, as we talked about before, remember that civility means, doing the hard things sometimes,
Yeah.
speaking truth in love, telling that candid piece of feedback, but doing it out of respect and not weaponizing it, not taking someone's mistake, bludgeoning them over the head with it, doing it with grace. So that's one thing. And the final one that's appropriate for how we met through the ProHuman Foundation, kind of themes that we've discussed is, remember the gift of being human in ourselves and in others. Like, don't demonize that person for the mistake they always make. Don't, have grace for yourself. Just cultivate an ongoing appreciation for this profound thing called life. And that's, I'm reading this. I'm a Christian, but I'm reading this book by a Buddhist monk on anger, and in Buddhism, they call it the mental formations. You can have a mental formation, just like kind of an idea that takes root in your head that is negative, like a seed of resentment that just kind of a bitterness towards someone, or you can have a positive mental formation that is life-giving, and so just cultivate that mental formation, as the Buddhists might say, that just fundamental affection, that general affection for our fellow human beings. I called Larry David television's favorite misanthrope.
Yeah.
Misanthropic means you don't like people. Anthropos is the Greek word for human beings.
Mm.
And he's a misanthrope. He doesn't like people. He fundamentally, wishes that he was on an island and that he would, but like most of us, and we all have those Larry David moments where like, you know what? I wish that I
Hmm.
didn't live in society. I wish I was homesteading or on a desert island where I didn't have to be
Yes.
afraid. I feel that way sometimes too. I just want to give up.
Hmm.
But the reality is life together with others is the good life. And to do
Hmm.
that, it requires seeing the world correctly and seeing ourselves and others as we really are, beings with innate dignity and worth, worthy of respect, full stop.
Yeah.
Being good to others, not because it'll get us a promotion, not because we want to curry favor with our boss and get that raise or something like that. Not for those utilitarian reasons, but it's the right thing to do, to treat another human being with respect, full stop.
I absolutely love that. And I like the idea of mental formation as an idea too, because it gives me some agency that I can
Yes.
form the
Yes.
thoughts and they can serve me or they don't serve me.
Yes.
I really love that. Well, I always like to bring a bit of silliness towards the end of the show. So my show has a lot of sound effects on it. If you listen to it, I make cat sounds and other stuff. You don't have to make a cat sound, but I do invite you to make a sound if you want to contribute to our growing library.
Well, can I play for you the soundtrack that I listened to writing my book? I was just, all into Eric Satie. I don't remember why or how, but I literally thank him in my acknowledgments of my books. I'm like, you know, this is Eric Satie. So here was the soundtrack of my book. Very famous that you've probably heard before. This is Eric Satie's Gymnopédie. Have you heard this before?
Not sure. I like it though.
It's just calming and mellow, and I played it on repeat, all of his stuff. It's kind of fun, whimsical, weird.
Yeah.
Eric Satie.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to include that in the notes as well so people can check it out, because I think that's a fun one. It's always good to have a soundtrack to our work and our lives. So I appreciate that. Last question simply is, Lexi, where can people find you online and learn more about the great work you're doing, your book, and everything else?
Please join us over at Civic Renaissance. That's civic-renaissance.com. It's my newsletter publication dedicated to beauty, goodness, and truth, and reviving the wisdom of the past to help us lead better lives. And it's where we're thinking deeply about all the same questions we've been talking about here, the nature of the good life and life with others.
I love that. We'll point people there, and I encourage people to check it out. And I encourage us all to think a little bit more about what the good life means to us and how we can contribute to it. Well, thank you, Lexi. This was an amazing conversation, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the DesuckifyWork podcast. And a huge thanks to Lexi for bringing a deeply thoughtful perspective on work and life to the show. You can follow Lexi on LinkedIn and check out her Substack newsletter at civic-renaissance.com, an ongoing conversation on the power of civility to help us create the good life. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to help your teams bring their absolute best to work, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session. Type meow in the calendar invite, and I'll also send you a free DesuckifyWork t-shirt. Bye, everyone.